Lebanon's telecom minister, Johnny Korm, plans recovery after Israel aggression with damage assessment. S&P Global warns US tariffs on Europe, Mexico and Canada could cost carmakers 17% of annual profits and lead to credit downgrades. Ukraine approves 2025 budget with record $50 billion defense spending, 60% of total expenditure. Hello, good evening and welcome to the Economic Bulletin here on Qnews, where we present comprehensive coverage and expert insights on the latest economic trends and developments. President Vladimir Zelensky has approved Kyiv's 2025 budget plans, which include record spending on defense. Kyiv plans to spend over $50 billion on defense, accounting for 60% of its total expenditure. Despite the significant military spending, the budget also includes $420.9 billion hryvnias for social welfare, $217 billion for healthcare and $199 billion for education. The budget has a total expenditure of $3.6 trillion and revenue of $2.05 trillion.
Вже били по Україні. Путін, очевидно, хоче додати ще тисячі.
Russian President Vladimir Putin has urged calm over the ruble's recent depreciation, attributing the fluctuations to seasonal and budgetary factors. Speaking after a summit in Kazakhstan, he reassured markets as the ruble rebounded from a 7% drop against the US dollar, stabilizing around 115. The central bank had halted foreign currency purchases until 2025 to steady markets. The economy minister, Maxim Reshetnikov, blamed the slump on the strong dollar, but analysts pointed to rising geopolitical tensions and new US sanctions on Gazprom Bank as contributing factors. Still in Russia, where the country's central bank has stated that while recent US sanctions on Russian financial institutions have caused forex market volatility, the ruble's exchange rate will ultimately depend on fundamental factors in the medium to long term. The central bank noted that sanctions typically create infrastructure challenges, disrupting export and import flows. It also advised commercial banks to cut foreign currency assets, particularly in yuan, warning of potential market volatility. Lebanon's telecommunications minister, Johnny Korm, has met with telecom operator Ogero and ministry officials to plan the sector's recovery after the Israeli aggression. He called for a full damage assessment and a comprehensive plan to restore services swiftly. Korm will also visit heavily damaged Ogero centers. Meanwhile, telecom companies Touch and Alpha restored 57 and 17 transmission stations respectively after disruptions caused by the aggression. Lebanon faces one of its worst crises, with billions in damages and shattered infrastructure. How will the government tackle the massive reconstruction challenge?
In the wake of the recent conflict, Lebanon is staring at an economic black hole. Economy Minister Amin Salem estimates total losses between 15 and 20 billion US dollars, with damage to homes, businesses, and infrastructure accounting for much of the destruction. Reconstruction, according to the minister, will require an initial 3 to 5 billion US dollars just to address immediate needs in 2025. The government's recovery efforts hinge on restoring stability. Strengthening the Lebanese army's presence along the borders and in the south is seen as essential to preventing further destabilization. This will also ensure that more than 1.5 million displaced people can safely return to their homes and begin rebuilding their lives. The telecommunications sector is also reeling. 18 transmission stations were destroyed, while fuel shortages and restricted access to damaged areas have caused further disruptions. Despite this, companies like Alpha and Touch have managed to restore some services, with 57 and 17 transmission stations back online, respectively. Restoring full functionality across the country could take up to 2 years. Lebanon's telecom network, Qnews, estimates that 6.6% of its subscribers have been affected, with critical infrastructure damaged in areas hardest hit by airstrikes. A contingency plan is in place to ensure state institutions remain connected, but officials warn that rebuilding the sector will require significant funding. The recent ceasefire has provided Lebanon with a moment to breathe, but as Minister Salem cautions, a truce alone will not rebuild the country. The road to recovery is long, requiring billions in funding, international partnerships, and painful reforms. For now, Lebanon's future hangs in the balance as the nation works to emerge from the rubble of war.
Now, joining us today from Beirut to discuss challenges and plans for rebuilding Lebanon's telecom sector is Mr. Johnny Korm, the Lebanese telecommunications minister. Welcome to Q News. Thank you very much for being there with us. What is the estimated economic loss to the telecom sector due to the aggression on Lebanon?
Well, I have to admit that the costs have not been finalized. Because we have to do an actual physical survey, and we have not been able to cover the whole territory as of yet. I have to say that I'm very proud of the men and women who are working in this sector, because they've done an amazing job, even in the last couple of days, of trying to restore some of the network that was damaged in the process. And we did put out a survey. We did put out a report that we sent to Paris about a month ago, or a little bit less than that. And in that report, we had estimated that the damage at that point was around $117 million for both operators, Alpha and Touch, and also for the fixed network, which is Qnews in the ministry. So this is where we are right now. You had mentioned some figures, which I agree with, in terms of the damages. I think that we're well on our way, even in the last 48 hours, to have repaired a substantial, maybe 25% of the network that was damaged. We do have some long-term damages, but we are trying also to create some kind of cooperation between Alpha, Qnews, and the fixed network to try to resolve the problem between the three of them. Of course, we're doing national roaming. Wherever one of them is available, we can try to make sure that the other two get their cut as well. So this is where we're at right now.
And Mr. Korm, has the displacement of people within Lebanon impacted the pressure on the existing networks? And what solutions are being considered?
Well, initially, of course, yes, because we had a lot of people that were displaced from the south and from the Bekaa into other areas of the country, and the network had to accommodate this big movement of people. We dealt with this pretty good, I have to admit. Now, as you know, Lebanese people are very resilient, and I think the ceasefire was announced at 4 a.m. At 4:05 already, you could see the coastal highway being really, really busy, and people were going back to their homes in their villages. And I think the movement is going back right now. And like I said, we've been in the past 48 hours working very heavily on trying to restore the damages.
And how long do you think it might take to restore services to as they were before the aggression by Israel?
Well, some of the damages might take up to a year, really, but like I said, what we're trying to do is to initiate national roaming. So if one of the operators is still able to provide a service, they can transfer this to the other two and vice versa. So I think this will help a little bit. But the most important thing is to act quickly and make sure that everybody is connected, because as you know, today's world is very much dependent on the internet services. And actually, there's a report in my possession from the World Bank that links directly the internet to the GDP of the country. So we acknowledge this. We're very much aware that a speedy recovery for the economy requires a good internet service.
And with that in mind, what is the long-term vision for the telecom sector in Lebanon? And what does the government have to do to work towards that vision?
Well, unfortunately, right now, I mean, we're just coming out of a major war, and we're thinking of, making sure that we have the service back up as quickly as possible. The long-term vision, of course, we have many, many different plans, but one of them entails the creation of a third operator, which is called Lebanon Telecom, and implementing Law 431 to get this activated. Also, we need connection, because right now we're connected to the outside world with only 2 cables. And I think that we need to have redundancy. This is what we're looking at. We're looking at redundancy, providing redundancy, not only through marine cables, but possibly terrestrial cables as well, and possibly satellites. So we are looking at all these different options right now, but some of them, of course, they require finance, and also we have to take that into consideration.
And of course, you mentioned there, of course, you are just coming out of a dreadful war on Lebanon. How will the government work to restore investor confidence in the telecom sector and attract that much needed foreign direct investment?
Well, the reality is that I believe in the Lebanese people. I believe in how resilient they are, and I believe in their abilities. And the reality also is it's a fact that we may have 5 million Lebanese people inside of Lebanon, but we have 4 times as many probably outside of Lebanon. And all we need is, a little bit of stability, and Lebanon is able to recover. I'm counting on the Lebanese people and how they feel about their country. This is also very important for us. They've played a major role in the economy in the past, and I think they will continue to play a major role in the future. You only need to look at the reservations with MEA, Middle East Airlines. Right after the war, the following day, it was swamped with people wanting to come back and spend the holidays here in Lebanon. And this is an indication of the attachment of the Lebanese people for their country.
And are there any international organizations or countries, perhaps, that have offered assistance in helping you to rebuild the telecommunications infrastructure?
Actually, so far, as you might already be aware, following the Paris meeting that took place about a month ago, I mentioned earlier, there was a promise to offer almost $1 billion for the Lebanese recovery. As of yet, we haven't seen any of that money. but eventually I think some of that money will filter down to the government. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, I think that the Chinese government also has indicated that they're also willing to support. At this point in time, because it may take a long time to rebuild the whole network, the infrastructure, we are looking at other options that are quick fix, so to speak, and that includes putting up some LTE sites in the south and in the Bekaa to replace the damaged network. And I think that China is, could possibly be, a country that's going to help in this area, and we are working closely with them on that.
And do you think there's a chance that Lebanon could perhaps, in the future, when you get things back on track, integrate its telecommunications sector with neighboring countries to create regional economic opportunities? Do you think that's an option?
I do believe that I mentioned a little bit earlier as well that there's a possibility we're looking at doing a terrestrial cable. Now, this project is under study right now and was under study before the war started. The hurdle for that is the Caesar Act in Syria, as you know. But eventually, when that goes away, there's a plan in place to connect the Gulf and the Arabic countries as well through Lebanon and onto the Western world, and specifically Europe.
And I think we started by asking you a little about the costs of this. Will there be international aid? We mentioned the international aid to help you with the telecom. Will there be international involvement, perhaps, with the rebuilding of the telecom sector?
This has not been determined. It's up for grabs. We have to wait and see, but we hope so.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for joining us, and thank you very much for your time. Johnny Corm, the Lebanese Telecommunications Minister, joining us here on Qnews. Thank you very much. Now, Canada's economy grew 1% on an annualized basis in the third quarter. This growth was driven by higher household and government spending, partially offset by slower inventory accumulation. According to a flash estimate from Statistics Canada, September's GDP increased by 0.1% below expectations, with a similar 0.1% rise anticipated for October. Europe now, where preliminary data from France's National Institute of Statistics and Economic Studies has shown that consumer prices rose in line with expectations in November, driven by lower food prices and higher service costs. France's harmonized inflation rate increased to 1.7% in November from 1.6% in October. Service prices grew by 2.5% year on year, while energy prices fell 0.7%. Inflation, based on France's own consumer price index, was 1.3% in November. S&P Global said in a report that European and American car makers are set to lose up to 17% of their combined annual core profits if the US imposes import tariffs on Europe, Mexico and Canada. The bank also warned of potential credit downgrades. S&P stated that premium automakers, Volvo, Jaguar and Land Rover, which primarily produce in Europe along with General Motors and Stellantis, which assemble high volumes of cars in Mexico and Canada, are most vulnerable to the threat of higher tariffs. US President Joe Biden has expressed hope that President-elect Donald Trump would reconsider his plan to impose tariffs on Mexico and Canada.
I hope he rethinks it. I think it's a counterproductive thing to do. You know, look, one of the things you've heard me say before that we have an unusual situation in America. We're surrounded by the Pacific Ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, and two allies, Mexico and Canada. And the last thing we need to do is begin to screw up those relationships. I think we've got them in a good place. I think by the way, you know, the cooperation with the outgoing president and the incoming president, the illegal crossings are down considerably to what they were back when he was in office. There's a lot more to do, but I just think, I hope they reconsider.
According to Eurostat, Eurozone inflation climbed to 2.3% in November from 2% in October. This was driven by a 3.9% increase in service prices, despite a 1.9% drop in energy costs. The European Central Bank is still expected to cut interest rates amid weak growth concerns and potential US tariffs under the incoming Trump administration. According to Federal Labor Office data, it has revealed that unemployment in Germany rose less than anticipated in November. Seasonally adjusted figures show a 7,000 increase in the number of unemployed, bringing the total to 2.86 million. The seasonally adjusted unemployment rate remained steady at 6.1% as economic challenges continued to impact the labour market. Bank of France head and European Central Bank member Francois Villeroy-de-Galhau stated that Prime Minister Michel Barnier's efforts to reduce the French deficit are going in the right direction. Speaking at an economic forum in France, Villeroy emphasized the importance of regaining control over the public deficit. His comments come as Barnier's government faces growing challenges with his struggles to pass the 2025 budget through a divided parliament, threatening to destabilize his fragile coalition. Asia now. Government data has shown that core consumer inflation in Japan's capital accelerated in November and stayed above the central bank's 2% target. Japan's core consumer price index, which includes volatile fresh food costs, rose 2.2% in November from a year earlier. Another index that strips away both fresh food and fuel costs, which is closely watched by the Bank of Japan as a better gauge of demand-driven inflation, rose 1.9% in November. India's economy growth slowed in July to September, driven by weaker growth in manufacturing and consumption, increasing pressure on the central bank to lower interest rates. Data showed that India's economy expanded by only 5.4% year-on-year. The growth in gross domestic product was lower than the central bank's estimate of 7%. The gross value added, a measure of economic activity, saw a modest 5.6% growth, easing from 6.8% increase in the previous quarter. Government data showed that India's fiscal deficit for April to October totaled $88.79 billion, or 46.5% of the annual target. Net tax receipts received $154.6 billion, 51% of the full-year goal, slightly up from the same period last year. Total government spending was $293.3 billion, around 51% of the target, with lower expenditure attributed to earlier general elections. Capital expenditure stood at $55.7 billion, down from $65.3 billion a year ago. The fiscal deficit target for the year 2025 is set at 4.9% of GDP, down from 5.6% last year. Now, moving to the markets, and global shares have traded lower as markets discuss impact of Trump's proposed tariffs and how it will shape global economy and trade. In the United States, this Friday marks an abbreviated trading day. The S&P rose 0.3%, while the Dow Jones Industrial Average traded 0.3% higher, and the Nasdaq rose 0.4%. In Europe, France's CAC 40 was nearly unchanged, while Germany's DAX edged down 0.1% and Britain's FTSE 100 declined less than 0.1%. In Asian trading, Tokyo's Nikkei 225 index fell 0.4%, South Korea's Kospi lost 2%, Hong Kong's Hang Seng index gained 0.3%, and the Shanghai Composite surged 0.9%. That's just about it for now, but let's have a recap of today's key economic headlines. Lebanon's telecom minister, Johnny Korm, plans recovery after Israeli aggression with a damage assessment. Ukraine approves the 2025 budget with a record $50 billion defense spending, 60% of total expenditure. Ukraine approves, as I mentioned, the Ukraine approves the 25 budget with a record $50 billion defense spending. And that's all for today's Economic Bulletin on Qnews. Stay connected for more news and updates by following us on social media. Thanks for now.